Aloha mai kako. You are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you, as always, from the sunny climes of Western Japan, here on the 12th day of July, 2013. Welcome to episode 275 of the Corbett Report podcast, Solutions, Boycotts and Buycotts. Well, the basic premise of today's episode is so remarkably simple that even a child could follow the logic behind it. So let's think of a case example. Let's imagine a morbidly obese man who goes to eat at McDonald's every single day. And at a certain point, he realizes that there may be some linkage between the crap that he's ingesting at McDonald's and his morbid obesity. And he becomes outraged at McDonald's. Well, I can't believe this corporation has been feeding me this crap all this time. This is at least partially why I'm so horribly obese. I'm really angry at McDonald's. Well, this man has two ways to direct his anger. The first would be to start some sort of political campaign, start some awareness campaign, start some lobbying campaign to try to get McDonald's to change its menu so that they would start feeding him healthier options. Well, we should make sure that McDonald's isn't allowed to sell bad food to me. We should make sure that they can only sell healthy food so that no matter how much I eat there, I will become a healthy, fit individual. Or the person can simply stop eating crap at McDonald's. I don't think, again, it takes very much contemplation to understand which of those two methods is more effective. And yet when it comes to the idea of fighting the New World Order that we talk about here on the podcast regularly, the concept of actually taking personal responsibility for what we can affect at our own local level still seems to fly over the heads of many people. Actually, I don't think it really does. That's a cop-out. It doesn't fly over their heads. They just don't want to do it because taking personal responsibilities for one's actions is never a fun thing to do. So there are a lot of people who will make excuses for why they don't need to stop feeding the beast that is enslaving them. What they really need to do is make sure that the government will come in and regulate that beast, or that they'll ask the corporations on bended knee, oh please, pretty please, stop enslaving us. No, the personal responsibility that we all have to take is, I think, one of the key cruxes of this entire issue. And again, a child could understand this logic. So let's take a look at an extremely effective presentation of this particular piece of reasoning that I'd often turn back to. It's from a piece that Tony Cartolucci wrote on Land Destroyer Report last year in October. And I think he frames the entire position in a very, very eloquent way. So let's turn to this article called Self-Sufficiency, a Local Solution to a Global Problem. Quote, when thinking about solutions, many are quick to cite organizing a protest and taking to the streets. Let's for a moment consider the mechanics of a protest, what it might accomplish, and what it may leave to be desired. Take Glenn Beck's disingenuous 2010 Restoring Honor event in Washington, D.C. It drew thousands of honest, well-intentioned people from all over the United States. Indeed, thousands of people filled up their Fortune 500 made cars with gas from Fortune 500 oil companies, drove countless miles, stopping along the way at Fortune 500 fast food restaurants, stayed at Fortune 500 run hotels, and stocked up on supplies purchased at Fortune 500 Walmart. They slaked their thirst under the hot August sun with cans of Fortune 500 Pepsi and Coke, and at the end of the day they drove home, paid their Fortune 500 cable subscriptions to watch their Fortune 500 media reports, most likely on News Corporation's Fox News, a Council on Foreign Relations corporate member. At best, all a protest will lead to, while we are so hopelessly dependent on this system, is a round of musical chairs inside the political arena, with perhaps superficial concessions made to the people. The vector sum, however, will still be decidedly in favor of the global corporate financier oligarchy. If we understand that the fundamental problem facing not only America, but the entire world is a global corporate financier oligarchy that has criminally consolidated their wealth by liberalizing their own activities while strangling ours through regulations, taxes, and laws, we should then understand why events like Beck's Restoring Honor are not only fruitless, but in fact counterproductive. We should also realize that any activity we commit ourselves to must be directed at this corporate financier oligarchy rather than the governments they have co-opted and positioned as buffers between themselves and the masses. While people understand something is wrong and recognize the necessity to do something, figuring out what that something should be becomes incredibly difficult when so few understand how power really works and how to strip it away from the oligarchs that have criminally consolidated it. End quote. I think that's a perfect summary of the futility of some of these situations, and I think we could extrapolate this to a lot of other examples. In fact, we could look at something much more recent. We could look at the NSA spying scandal, which finally, for whatever reason, has broken through to the public consciousness and gotten a lot of people upset about these invasions of privacy, so that people are now, well, willing to get out there on the streets and rally and protest to make everything better. And so, for example, we saw the Restore the Fourth movement coming along, trying to organize people for rallies. But again, let's look at it through that framework that Cartolucci just laid out there in his article. So people will hop on their Windows PCs in order to log into their Facebook accounts to post information and try to rally people to come out and plead with the government to pretty please restore the Fourth Amendment, which is a natural God-given human right and nothing to do with government whatsoever. And then they'll go to those protests and use their smartphones, their Apple smartphones, to record videos and photos of the event, which they will then immediately post to Twitter. And just like that, they have already used the NSA spying grid surveillance system in 7 different ways just from those few actions alone. And they have fed themselves directly into the system that they claim to be opposing. Once again, it's like the fat man raging at McDonald's and trying to get them to offer healthier options rather than simply stop eating at McDonald's. Well, again, simply stop using the technology and stop paying, more importantly, stop paying for the technology from the companies that are admittedly in bed with the government and admittedly cooperating in this surveillance system. So this is the crux of today's episode. Rather than lecturing at you about the theory of this practice, why don't we actually get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts? Because that's what we're really here for at the end of the day anyway. And in that regard, we've lined up a lot of very interesting interviews with some very interesting people in the last few days at CorbettReport.com. So I hope you are following the interviews to RSS feed at Corbett Report so that you can follow these conversations as they're happening. But why don't we go through a few of these conversations with guests that are talking about specific ways that you can withdraw yourself from feeding into this corporate oligarchical system, which is that fascistic link in the chain that is part of the overall system that's enslaving us. And again, it is easier to do than you might think. For example, I just mentioned people logging onto their Windows PCs to use Facebook to organize rallies and what have you. This is a fundamental part of this whole surveillance grid that most people don't even give a second's thought to, but it is a fundamental link in this chain. It is the operating system that we are all using in order to access our own files on our own computers, and the fact that those operating systems themselves are compromised. And again, this is not something that we have to speculate about. This is not something that is up in the air or something that we don't know about in specific detail. In fact, we do know that, for example, Microsoft Windows has been compromised by the NSA for decades. We can go back to 1999 specifically to an article from Telopolis, which was talking about how NSA access was built into Windows, and that notes that, quote, a careless mistake by Microsoft programmers has revealed that special access codes prepared by the U.S. National Security Agency have been secretly built into Windows. The NSA access system is built into every version of the Windows operating system now in use, except early releases of Windows 95 and its predecessors. The discovery comes close on the heels of the revelations earlier this year that another U.S. software giant, Lotus, had built an NSA help information trapdoor into its note system, and that security functions on other software systems had been deliberately crippled. End quote. I would exhort you to go and read that full article so that you can find out more of the specifics about that NSA backdoor access through Windows. But again, we've known for at least 14 years now, going back to at least Microsoft Windows 95, that the NSA has had backdoor access to your computer because of the Windows operating system itself, which is such a basic part of computers that most people who are not tech savvy or tech inclined won't even give a second's thought to it. Of course it's a Windows PC. What other possibilities are there? Well, in that regard, we had a very interesting conversation recently with Tim Kilkenny of Revelations Radio News about this open source software movement that is the sort of the hidden solution to all of this that's been there all along, but very few people have taken the time to familiarize themselves with. And this is talking, of course, about Linux operating systems, also open source software that provides a counter to this proprietary software. For people who are confused about those terms, I'll ask you to go and listen to the full conversation. But why don't we just listen to a portion of that conversation with Tim Kilkenny, where we were talking about how easy it is these days to switch over to an open source software environment.
Sure, I did an experiment about a year or two ago and just ran nothing but open source, everything. I ran open source operating system, open source software, and it's actually, in this day and age, much easier than people probably think. Linux has this reputation for, you have to go in the terminal and enter these lines of code to tell your computer what to do. Not anymore. In this day and age, there are some really easy ways to switch to open source software. The most popular of which is Ubuntu. And just like you said, you can go to a website, which is ubuntu.com, and you can get a live version of the CD. You download it. It's an ISO. And you just make it a bootable CD. If you're on a Mac system, you just right-click. If you're on a Windows 7, I think there is an option where you can make it a bootable CD. You download it, you shut your computer off, you turn it back on, and you can actually try out the interface just with, from the CD and, see what, you would like, if you would like it. And there's all kinds of videos on YouTube, people sitting their parents or grandparents down to try Windows 8 and then to try Ubuntu or Linux Mint or one of these. And Windows 8, by far and away, is the hardest one to use. I mean, this is a great time to switch to open source because, obviously, the NSA, but as well as Windows 8 being a dog of a system. I do have it installed in a partition on this computer, and it's got quite a learning curve. Not near as much as something like Ubuntu, which, after trying it out, you can simply hit install this to your disk, and then you can actually follow the instructions fairly straightforward. You can dual boot, where if you can hold on to your Windows and still have Linux or still have Ubuntu, or you can just overwrite the whole thing. And you can get screenshots, you can watch videos that show how to do this. It's quite easy these days, and in my opinion, a prettier. I mean, I have an eye for these things, and it's just a prettier software. It's there's a lot of different pluses to it. It's no longer entering a bunch of code to be able to run your computer.
Well, of course, that's the operating system, which, of course, is kind of the base, as we were saying, for all the applications. But then there are the actual applications that people want to use themselves, the actual programs. When it comes to that, it can be much more difficult to be open source, only open source, but not as difficult, again, as people might believe. And for people who are wedded to things like Microsoft Office, it's really important to understand that there are things like OpenOffice, which I use myself. Why on earth would you pay Microsoft for a program which is equally as good and equally as proficient in a completely open source format that's freely available for download? So let's talk about some of those alternatives that people can be using.
Absolutely. Well, I actually just found this website today, James. I want to tell you about it. It's prism-break.org. And prismbreak.org is a website that shows all of the software needs that you might have or uses that you might have on one side, and on the right side, it has a open source, free and open source version of those. So, of course, you mentioned the number one thing people say is, "Oh my gosh, I can't do without Microsoft Office." That's the one. And for casual users, even that's the most important thing that they have, something they can look at Word documents or Excel in. OpenOffice is pretty good. It was recently purchased by Oracle and whatnot. A bunch of the developers jumped ship and made LibreOffice, Libre Office, which is, of course, I think it's Latin for liberty. It's a really good one. It's really good software. There's a few others. If you need Photoshop, there's of course GIMP, which I know you use. If you need Adobe Illustrator, there's Inkscape. If you need Microsoft Outlook. There's, of course, Thunderbird. If you need an audio editor, I know there's Audacity. I think you also use that. And then there's even a video. There's a couple of video editors. I don't have them offhand, but there is a four-dimensional or a 3D editor called Blender, and it's just as powerful as any software you could possibly use. So there are open source alternatives to these things. They're free, therefore they don't have a lot of advertisements. People don't know about them. They have to go out and seek them. You're not going to see an ad for Ubuntu, when you're watching the Super Bowl or whatnot. These things, you just have to seek them out, but there are large numbers of communities who are dedicated to these things, who put their whole lives into running these things. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about on my show, and I know you talk about it a lot, is hackers and whether they work for the government, but they all generally use Linux. They're developing software. They're using open source software because it's the safest.
Once again, Tim Kilkenny of Revelations Radio News, and once again, I would hope you would listen to that full conversation where we talk in more length and detail about open source software, open source operating systems, what that really means, why it's important. But I hope you at least get the gist of this, that again, if we are paying Microsoft and Apple and these other companies so that they can give us their spy-laden, backdoor, booby-trapped software, then we are a part of the system. We are actively complicit and cooperating in the system that is enslaving us. So again, we have to understand our personal responsibility in this, and the very least that each and every one of us can do is to remove our personal responsibility by removing our support, monetary and otherwise, from these structures. Another good case in point example while we're on the subject of IT is Google, because of course, as everyone knows, it's one thing to have physical security of your own computer in terms of your own operating system and your own software, but once you log onto the internet, you start interfacing with all sorts of, shady and creepy customers like Google and Facebook and others. And again, it's important to understand that there is a documented, admitted, 100% on the record, secret relationship between Google and the NSA, which is officially acknowledged, although the federal district courts have ruled that you, the American people, do not have the right to know any details about that relationship. Yes, Google and the NSA are in bed, but we can't tell you anything about it. So again, this is not speculation. When you use Google, you are directly giving your information to the NSA. You might as well be handing it to them on a silver platter. And once again, you are actively cooperating and complicit in the feeding of the beast that you claim to be raging against every single time you use Google or Facebook or any of these other insider globalists, Fortune 500, CFR, Bilderberg connected organizations. So, and again, Bill Gates is a Bilderberg attendee, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, the question becomes, well, Google is just, Google means to search. It's become a verb in the English language. Surely it is the only option available. And some people might know of some alternatives like Yahoo or Bing, but I'm here today to tell you that no, there are other examples. So once again, I often talk about it. I'll talk about it again. I personally use startpage.com for my searching. Startpage.com has a wealth of privacy settings and options and a policy that guarantees that they do not record IP addresses and that they do not record any information about any of the searches that are conducted on their systems. This is absolutely light years 100% different from any other search engine that's out there, really, fundamentally. And I had the honor recently of talking to the U.S. Media Relations spokesperson for startpage.com, none other than Dr. Catherine Albrecht, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with for her excellent work exposing the RFID enslavement system, the biometric control grid that's coming in through RFID and customer loyalty cards and all of that. She's written, for example, Spy Chips, which has also been widely circulated online through interviews and lectures and documentaries and the like. So I hope that people are already familiar with Dr. Albrecht. She's also on the board with startpage.com because when she first found out about the search engines and how they were logging and detailing, cataloging and databasing and tracking all of the information on all of their users, she got freaked out. She scoured the world looking for a search engine that didn't do that and found xquick.com that's based in the Netherlands and thus not subject to any US laws or any Patriot Act or anything of that sort. And xquick has expanded into Startpage, which is a kind of sister search engine, Xquick being a meta search engine, and Startpage basically scraping Google for Google results, but not giving any of your data or information to Google. So that's the long and short of Startpage. And earlier this morning for me here in Japan, I had the chance to talk to Dr. Albrecht about Startpage and some of the features that it offers people in terms of stopping the 100% panopticon surveillance spying that Google is 100% in conjunction with the NSA doing on everyone.
So Xquick, which has been around since 1999, is what's called a meta search engine. We take your search query. I now work for the company, by the way. I fell so much in love with them. I said, I've got to help you. So we take your search query and we submit it to multiple search engines from our servers, so they never see you. We get the results, and then through a proprietary algorithm, we quickly, in a matter of milliseconds, pull out the best results and then serve them to you. With Startpage, what we discovered was that people really wanted the Google results, that they didn't want meta search results from other search engines. They really liked what Google was giving them. And, that's no surprise. Google is the best search engine on planet Earth, bar none. I don't think anybody questions that. So what we did was we created the Startpage search engine, which is a private portal to access Google results. So when you go to Startpage, you'll see a little search box just like you would see it at Google or Bing. You type in your search term. We take your search term. We strip out anything that would identify you. We submit it ourselves from our servers to Google. We get the answers. We strip out any tracking cookies or other content that would come with it. We serve you the pure results, and then we delete all records of your visit. So we erase your IP address. We serve you the results through an SSL HTTPS encrypted link, so no one can eavesdrop on your search. And at the end of the day, we have no records on who's been on our website, what IP addresses have visited us, what search terms were searched for. It's all just wiped clean. It's a blank slate. And so even if, God forbid, we were to receive a subpoena that we had to respond to, or if we got hacked, it's never happened, but it happened to Google when the Chinese government hacked Google servers to get into dissidents' email over in China. So it's happened to others. It's never happened to us. But if it did, there would absolutely be nothing on our service to obtain. So there's multiple layers of protection. You get the protection of getting the results without the tracking cookies. Google never sees you. We make no record of who you are. You're encrypted, so even your ISP is unable to see. They can see that you've connected with us, but they can't see what you're submitting back and forth. And then we've got a really cool additional feature, which is not available really anywhere else on the Internet. And that is that when you perform a private search with either Startpage or Xquick, at the bottom of the search, underneath the search term, is a link that says View by Xquick Proxy. And what that means is, let's say that when I was looking up information about breast cancer, that one of the links was, for example, the National Institutes of Health. Well, if you go to the NIH website, there are, I think it's anywhere from like 6 to 10 different tracking cookies by third-party providers that are tacked on to some of these health websites. There was just a report out on that yesterday. So when you go there, there's all this garbage attached to it. And if I search for that on Startpage and I get a link to whatever health website and I click it, I leave the protection of Startpage and I'm just on the Wild West Internet landing on that page. But what we've done is we've built in a way for you to not only do your searches privately, but to actually view the content of the websites that you find privately through our proxy. So when you click View by Xquick Proxy, we go out to the National Institutes of Health page that you want to see for you. We load all of their content onto our servers, and then we show it to you through our servers privately. So if there are any third-party tracking cookies, if there's any malware or spyware, if there's any, really anything that would compromise your privacy, that gets stripped out as we serve you the private results. And then once again, we delete all records of who's seen what and what pages were served. So it's actually pretty cool, and it's a pretty thorough privacy protection. You could actually do almost all of your web surfing through it and never be seen by anybody.
Dr. Catherine Albrecht, catherinealbrecht.com, talking about startpage.com. And if you go on in that interview, which again is posted in its entirety on corbettreport.com, you can listen to details about startmail.com, which will be being launched this fall. So you can find out more information about StartMail, a webmail service that not only doesn't read your email, as every other webmail service does explicitly state in their privacy policies that they do. They can't even possibly read your email because it uses PGP encryption, and you're the only person who has that PGP password. So at any rate, you can find out more about startmail.com in that interview, and you can go to startmail.com to find more information generally. But let's move along. Of course, the IT side of this is only one tiny piece of this larger puzzle that we're looking at here, again, week in and week out. Another key part of this that we keep coming back to is, once again, you do at this point still have the freedom to choose what you do and don't put in your mouth when you're choosing food for your family. And this is an exceptionally important piece of the puzzle because, again, a sickened and defeated population is one that is easily controlled and colonized. And I think this is something that's been well understood for centuries, if not millennia, and certainly has been made explicit in such things as Henry Kissinger's 1974 National Security Memorandum 200, in which he argued for food as a weapon, etc. This is something that, again, has been long talked about and long understood in globalist elite circles, that food can be used as a weapon against the people. And of course, we are seeing that very specifically with the biotech agenda rolling out through Monsanto and Dow Chemicals and all of these monstrosities that they're trying to release, not only the GMOs, but of course also all the processed foods and processed chemical crap that's being inserted into our foods. So this again is another point where if you are paying the companies that are creating this for the privilege of eating their crap that is making you sick, then at least in a small measure you are responsible for that. It is personal responsibility. And it can be exceptionally daunting to think about trying to get off of the chemical processed food, big food, industrial complex treadmill, which so many of us are caught on because, well, I just don't have time to make anything for my family. I'm just going to go to the supermarket and pick something up or pick up some drive-through on the way home, and that'll have to do. It's only food. What does it matter? Well, of course, you are what you eat, and you are literally ingesting the chemicals that are being made in these factories that are making people sick in record numbers with autoimmune diseases skyrocketing, cancer, all of these horrible health effects, which are exactly coming in line with the rise of processed foods in the Western world. And I think we can tie the obesity epidemic into this, and the high fructose corn syrup and all of this other chemical crap that we're being laden with. So once again, the question is, well, what can we personally do about it? And once again, the answer is you can stop paying the money to the corporations that are making this crap, and you can start paying money to local farmers and others who are producing locally produced food, that you can shake their hand and look in their eye and know what you're putting on your plate with some degree of certainty. And again, this is a very large task, and it's not something that you're likely to be able to change 100% overnight, but it is something that people can at least make baby steps towards. And once again, I'm no paragon of virtue on this. We still buy a lot of our foods from supermarkets, but we are growing more and more at home. We're getting more from family members who grow foods. We go more and more to farmers markets and local vegetable shops and the like. So we are trying to change our eating habits as well, and it's something that I think everyone should be actively engaged in, especially now that they really are flooding the food supply with all sorts of genetically engineered monstrosities. So once again, rather than simply lecturing on the utility for this, why don't we talk about the process of how to actually go about doing that? And that's something that I had the chance to talk to James Evan Pilato, of course, of MediaMonarchy.com, co-host of New World Next Week, and his girlfriend Cassie Cohn, who joined me after recording this week's New World Next Week, which, by the way, has only been released in audio form because of some technical difficulties on the video side. But after that conversation, we were able to record a conversation between the three of us talking about what James and Cassie did and how they managed to help get off of that big food system and are now sourcing much more of their food locally and organically.
I was really, really scared when I left the grocery store because actually New Seasons gave us a 20% discount, which made a huge difference, especially on foods that are already perceived to be more expensive. how do we do it?
That being said, this is another area where my mom is definitely the expert. My mom they budget their food on my dad's.
In the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express.
You try a hide and this show of freedom, man. You sick agenda. We know you anti-American. You come forward American Constitution. 1913, corrupt in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer. He can see you lying.